My name's Aaron Broughton. I have been with Decisions for a long time, since very nearly the beginning, a little over 12 years. I have spent most of my time with the professional services team, and more recently have transitioned over to managing the QA team. Now, before I jump in, I'm going to take a quick aside and just make sure that everybody's on the same page with what is unit testing. I'm not going to spend a long time on this, but I know that we have a number of new folks, and so I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page and talking about this the same way. So this is just a real quick overview of what unit testing is in Decisions, and then I'll get into the meat of what I want to talk about. Here is the world's most basic flow. It takes in two numbers, it adds those numbers, and it outputs the result of that. I have two inputs, number A, number B. I have the add step, which adds them together, and it creates the output as result. Result gets handed out as result. So an incredibly basic flow. This is just to illustrate for anybody who's not up to speed yet on what unit tests in Decisions are. When I debug or run this flow, I'm able to provide it two numbers and I can run it. In this section over here, we have unit tests. Unit tests are where you define predefined sets of input data and the expected outputs that those pieces of inputs should result in. So this first one, if I click on it, you see I have my number A and number B defined as 2 and 2. Up here is where you define your evaluation rule. So when it runs at the end, it looks at the output data and evaluates whether or not it got the expected output. I'll click on that. In this case, I'm evaluating the outcome from the done path that was named result. You remember I named my output result. And I check to see if it equals 4. So if this evaluates true, then I know that this unit test passed successfully. If it evaluates false, then it's going to tell me that something is wrong. Currently, I have 3 unit tests here. This next one, I'm testing to make sure that adding decimal numbers works. So I have 3.8, 2.7. I look at my evaluation rule, and I'm saying that I expect that to equal 16.5. And then I also have one that tests adding a large number. Whatever that is, plus 1 should equal whatever that is. Now I can click on Run All, and when I do, it executes each of these, one after the other, and gives me a red checkbox, or a green check mark if it passed the unit test successfully, and it'll give me a red X if it failed. So just to show you how that looks real quick, let's say that I'm editing this flow. It's a much more complex flow. I'm not familiar with it, and I'm remapping some things, and I accidentally mess up and pick number A in this property. And now I've finished making my edits, and I want to make sure that the edits that I made have not messed up this flow. I can run all, and I see, oh, one of my unit tests passed. Great. But 2 of them failed. So I got lucky on this first one because of the way that it was configured. On these other 2, now I know that I've got a problem, and I can look at the data, what is it inputting, and look at the output data and figure out what change that I just made has messed up these unit tests. So this is what we're talking about today, is unit tests, the value of them, why you should use them. But just to get everybody up to speed, I wanted to make sure that I overviewed that quickly. For anybody who may be new. All right, now to the meat of the presentation. There's 4 questions that I want to ask and help you answer. First one being, do I have to test? Second one being, who cares? Who in the organization cares about this or should care about it? How many tests are needed? And then finally, how can I make my testing life easier? I don't have suggestions for the rest of your life, but I will talk about your testing life. All right, there's a short answer and a long answer to this question. The short answer is yes. Yes, you have to test. The answer is yes. The longer answer is, if it doesn't have unit tests, it isn't done. This is one of the ways that we like to think about it at Decisions, especially on the professional services team where they're building projects for customers and they're being asked the question, is your work done? The answer is no if it doesn't have unit tests. So if it doesn't have unit tests, it isn't done. I have one main goal today, and that is that you walk out of here caring more about testing than when you came in. Testing software should not be an afterthought. In other areas of life, we instinctively know to be skeptical, which leads us to test things. Here's a few examples. When you hang a hammock, the first thing you do is you tug on the ropes before you hop yourself into that hammock. When you change the brakes on your car, or have somebody else like me, someone else change the brakes on your car for you, you intentionally pump them a few times when you first get in that car before you get up to interstate speeds. When you heat a baby bottle, you squirt a little bit on your wrist before you stick that thing in the baby's mouth. Plumbing. When you create a new plumbing connection for a sink, you're going to put that pipe under load and feel around the edges before you close the wall back up. Something as simple as picking up pizza. I don't walk out of Papa John's until I've cracked the box and I look and I see, okay, yes, they gave me the pizza that I ordered. I do that before I drive all the way home. Getting a new key made for your house. Think about when you've gotten a copy for your key made. The first thing you do is you come home, you stick it in the lock, you turn it, and make sure that that key works. That is a mindset that we have for so much of life, but I've noticed that with software, I don't know if it's because it seems like it exists in the realm of magic, a lot of times we just expect that it's going to work. We think, okay, I've built this thing, looks good, I'm just expecting it's going to work. No, use that skepticism that you instinctively have in the rest of life for software as well, and make sure that you are actively testing. Testing allows us to find problems when the risk of those problems is much smaller. That's the point of testing. You're going to find the problems one way or the other. You're going to find them either in testing or you're going to find them in production. Testing is what allows you to reduce the risk of those problems and push it earlier in the development cycle. So, coming back to the examples that I gave you in the rest of life, it's a lot less painful to figure out that your rope or that your knot is no good before you put your full weight on the hammock. It's a lot less catastrophic to figure out that your brakes were installed incorrectly before you're flying down the interstate. It's a lot less damaging to your wrist to figure out that the milk is too hot before you stick it in the baby's mouth. It's a lot less of a mess to find that your new plumbing connection leaks before closing up the wall and having a large mold problem in a few months. It's a lot less annoying to figure out that your pizza's wrong while you're still at the shop and can ask for a refund or ask them to give you the right pizza before you've driven all the way home and are starving and the kids are ready to eat and now it's the pizza that they detest. It's a lot less inconvenient to find that your newly cut key doesn't work when you've still got the good key right there in your pocket and it's not locked inside your house and this is the last key that you've got. Likewise, with software, it is a lot less expensive, less inconvenient, less embarrassing, less damaging, and less difficult to fix when you test and find problems in development rather than later in production. So if it doesn't have unit tests, it isn't done. Just have that be your mindset. All right, let's talk about who cares. Who in the organization should care about testing? Caring about testing is not the responsibility of just one person or even just one role in a development team, I would argue that at least 3 roles need to care about testing. The developer. All right, the obvious one, the developer. The developer needs to care about testing. Now, to those of you out there who are the developers, who are the ones living in decisions, building the flows day in and day out, I want to challenge you, to empower you, to help you think in this mindset that you are the one who declares when your work is done. You're going to be asked that question every day, every week, maybe multiple times a day. Are you done? And go back to the first slide, or the earlier slide that we were looking at. The answer is no, I'm not done if you don't have testing, don't have unit tests configured yet. When you're asked for estimates, developer, when you're asked for estimates on how long something is going to take, you're going to be inclined to think, all right, well, I can build this thing. I got to build a form. I got to build some rules. Okay, a week. And you haven't accounted for any of the testing that needs to go into that. Put that in your mindset. When you're giving estimates, put it all together, because it's not done until it is tested. The project manager. All right, some of you may be project managers in your teams. You have the responsibility, I think, to take the lead in helping to develop a culture of testing. You need to be building time in your project timelines for testing. You need to be encouraging your developers to think in the way that I just described. Don't put pressure on them to give you estimates that are smaller if they could just kind of go a little lighter on the testing. You're going to wish you hadn't done that in the long run. It may shorten the timeline immediately, but in the end, it's going to be, as I mentioned earlier, more expensive, more embarrassing, more damaging. It's going to be a problem later on. So you, as the project manager, help develop that culture in your team and set those expectations with them that testing is part of the definition of being done. And the third role that I'll mention that needs to care, needs to be one of the ones who cares about testing, is all the way to the product owner / product managers. This role also contributes significantly to the culture of testing. When you're getting demos, it comes time for your check-in demo and you're going to see the progress. Ask about testing. Say, how many tests does this thing have? If there's a piece of the project, you'll have developers occasionally come to you and say, well, this thing doesn't have a UI, and so I can't demo it to you. There's nothing really to demo. I can just tell you it's done. It does evaluate the data as you expect it, but there's nothing to see. It just reads some data and does some things. There's nothing that I can really show you, but it's done. You can say, all right, well, since I can't see any UI for it, which is understandable because of the part of the project that is, let's just look at the unit tests together. Show me the unit tests. Let's run them. I want to see all those green check marks. That's a thing that you can do as the product owner when your development team is coming to you and giving you the status update, the demo. You can say, all right, let's see the unit tests. That will help contribute significantly to this culture of testing. When everyone is on the same page regarding the importance of testing, your project stands a much higher chance of success. All right, now let's consider a common question that's asked when developing unit tests, and that is, how many tests are needed? All right, I know maybe I've convinced you. Hopefully I've convinced you up to this point. Okay, yes, I should unit test, but how many do I need? I'm not going to be able to give you a specific number in the answer to that question, but I can give you 3 guidelines that will help you. And these 3 guidelines fall under, I put them under the categories of good, better, and best, all right? The first one is that you should have more than 0, all right? Hopefully we've already established that. We'll call that good. That's stretching it. But as long as you've got more than 0, you're on the path to good. All right? Yes, you gotta start somewhere. So having more than 0 unit tests is a place to start, and it is a step in the right direction. Admittedly, it is insufficient. Your testing will miss lots of issues, and you should not stop here. But if you aren't regularly unit testing your flows, consider at least writing 1 or more than 0, so 1, which is better than nothing. This you might call happy path testing. All right, so that's what we call good. Once we get more than 0 tests, then we can start thinking about what's more ideal, what is better, all right? A better way to think about this is that you should strive for having at least 1 test per path in your flow, per outcome path, okay? So here's an example. We've got a flow that has 4 steps in it, and those 4 steps, the way that they are configured, come out to 10 different outcomes. All right, so in this definition of a better way to think about it, you should have at least 10 unit tests on this flow. Now, in this example, it's clear how many paths it has, since each path ends up going to its own end step. However, there are other flow designs where you have multiple paths that end up terminating in the same outcome step or end step. And that becomes a little bit more difficult to think through how many paths are actually here. So let's look at another example, which is illustrates that. This process here, we've got 2 end steps, but we actually have more than 2 paths. So I'm saying you need more than 2 unit tests to fit into this category of better. So let's count the paths through this. We have 1, that's our happy path, 2, 3, and then 4. So with a flow like this, you should be aiming for at least 4 unit tests. This will be significantly better than just testing the happy path. Once you've achieved at least testing each path through your flow, you should work to take it to the next level. All right, we're going from good to better, and now we're going to look at the idea of best. And with this, I'm going to say that you should be anticipating the unexpected, all right? This is where being able to anticipate the unexpected takes experience, all right? You need to look at each step in your flow, each and every step, look through them, and ask yourself different questions like, I'll give you an example of a question to ask. What could cause this step to behave differently than I expect it to? Now, this part of testing takes creativity. There's not an exact formula that you can run through to figure out what should I ask at this point. But try to put yourself in the shoes of your crazy end users who do everything possible to break the thing that you've built. They're gonna do exactly everything other than what you wanted them to do or what you expected them to do. And so you need to anticipate that. Here's an example of the flow that we just looked at. What if a name starts with a space? Someone's gonna do that, either on purpose or accident. They're gonna be copying someone's name from an email that they don't know how to spell. It's a long and a complicated name. They'll double click on it to copy it. It'll have accidentally grabbed the leading space before that name. They're gonna paste it into your form, and now you've got a space before the name. Is that something that's gonna cause this flow problems? Well, we should test for it. What if a name has numbers in it? Maybe it's Elon Musk's kid with that crazy name, and he's typed his name in there. Is that gonna goof this up? Is it okay for a name to start with a lowercase letter? Now, what I want you to realize is that these questions, and these are not all the questions you should ask, these are just examples. There's probably 100 questions that you could ask about this flow. But what I want you to realize is that this culture of testing, in addition to finding problems in the flow, like actual problems, areas where the flow does not work as expected, it also creates this like symbiotic relationship between the development team and the product owners, because now you're actually able to inform the requirements for the process. Is it okay for a name to start with a lowercase? Well, maybe. I don't know. It all depends on what the definition of the requirements are. It's very likely that as you're trying to ask these creative questions, as you're trying to imagine how could people break this, you might realize that, or you might ask a clarifying question, and the product owner says, "Oh, you know what? I didn't think about that. That's true. There is this group that we know about, and they all have lowercase names. I forgot about that. Yeah, we should handle all lowercase names." Or maybe in this example, we've created a flow that it only handles a first name, a middle name, and a last name. I know a guy that he had, I don't remember how many names he had. He had so many names, and then he reduced the number because it was just such a pain for him when he moved to the States. But every time he flew, his name got all messed up on the ticket because he never knew if he should put his extra names in the middle name or the first name or the last name field, and sometimes it would get parsed differently. And so asking these types of questions would allow you to have a discussion with the original developer of the requirements, and they would reconsider in many situations, how does this thing actually need to work? And so testing, while it helps find problems in the actual problems in the software, it also helps find problems or deficiencies or oversights in the requirements and allows you to get those clarified. All right, so these are our 3 categories. Good, at least start with more than 0. You've got to start there. That's just the baseline. If you want to graduate to being a better tester of your flows, at least develop a test per path and make sure that you're counting each of the paths as they crisscross and go through the flow. And then work out that muscle of anticipating the unexpected. You're gonna miss things. There's gonna be things that you miss, and don't let that discourage you. Just let that feed into your brain for next time of, okay, that's another thing that a user could do. That's another way that an external system could fail. That is going to go into my list of things that I need to think about. So learn to anticipate the unexpected. Now, hopefully I've convinced you that to invest more time in your testing. And it will take more time. This is effort. This is something that's going to slow you down, per se. It's going to make the development take longer, but as I mentioned earlier, it's going to pay off in the end. But since I've just put more work on your plate, I do want to try to make your life a little bit easier. So how can I make your testing life a little easier? And to that, I'm going to say build modular flows, okay? While planning and building flows, it is important to keep in mind how easy or how hard it will be to test. And you should try to make your life easier in this scenario. The larger and more complex a flow is, the harder that it is to test. So build modular flows. Here I'm going to say subflows are your friend. Okay? We're going to look at how that works. Let's look through this more complex flow. And this is not, I'm using this as an example. It's not an unbelievably complex flow. I know that many of you have got some that would make anyone's eyes bleed. But this is an example to illustrate a point. So here's what we're going to call a complex flow. It takes in 5 pieces of data: an email address, a first name, a middle name, a last name, and a password. And so in this scenario, this is a flow that is doing some processing logic to a new user creation process, and it's going to extract some data that it's received and validate some data. So it's going to output a username, which is extracted from the first part of the email address. So it's going to chop off the email, everything before the @ symbol, and say this is their username. It's going to also output the email domain, so everything after the @ symbol. It's going to create a new property that we can use for some display purposes later, where it's going to merge the first middle name, if it exists, and the last name. And it's also going to output, or it's going to extract the initials from all of the available names and output that. So when we look at this, there is a lot going on. If you were going to follow my rule for counting the paths, this would get a little bit complicated, and you'd be counting and trying to figure out, okay, if we go down this path, and then we go here, and then we could come up here, or we could keep going, or we could come up here, or we could keep going, or we could come down here. And so it's going to get a little bit, it's going to be a lot. What you want to do is you want to look for groups of steps that are doing common things. So in this scenario, we have this group up top that is validating and processing the email address. So this is a good candidate for breaking off into its own little modular subflow. Next, we've got this group of steps, which is validating that the password follows the rules that have been defined in the requirements. And then finally, this group of steps, which is looking at the names that were provided, figuring out which ones are available, and using those to merge up the full name and the initials. Now, if we were to build this or to redo this in a way that has subflows, it would end up looking more like this. I've taken those groups of steps and I've put them in their own subflows. And now in addition to making this a lot easier to test, we've also made this overall a lot cleaner. Now when somebody opens up this flow, they can look at this and see, oh, okay, I see it's doing 3 main things here, and they're going to be able to maintain the flow a lot easier. Let me step back once. Because this is an example, I lined my steps up real nice too. This, in the real world, you're going to find people who've developed stuff with these 4 steps kind of like all mixed up, and it's going to be hard to draw boxes around them. And so getting them into subflows really, really helps with the overall readability. So let's zoom in on one of these subflows and think about the unit tests that could be made for that subflow. We'll zoom in here on the validate and process email address. All right, so if we're just getting started with writing unit tests and we want to follow our first rule of writing more than 0, so right now we've got 0 under our unit test heading here, we're going to want to test at least the happy path. All right, so the happy path just goes straight through it. If everything is inputted here as expected, do we at least still output the data that we are anticipating? All right, so that would qualify in this rubric as good. Let's step it up a notch. All right, so we're going to move on to better. So with better, we need to start counting our paths again. So we add a second one. Is an invalid email address, do we handle that correctly if we have an invalid email address that's missing the @ symbol? All right, so we're going to write a test for that. We're still in the better category because we haven't finished writing all of our tests or all of our paths. There's a third path here where we have a valid email, but we have a banned email domain. So we have a list of email domains that we're not accepting. So now we've tested the happy path, and we've tested all of the other remaining paths. So now we've satisfied testing what I would consider the baseline for something that is a better thing to shoot for. Now's when we've got to get creative and start thinking about all the things that our users might do to us to try to make our lives miserable. So now let's test a different way that an email address could be invalid. Someone accidentally hits the @ symbol twice. Now we've got more than one @ symbol. Or someone put in an email address with some special characters, some characters that are invalid in an email address. Or an invalid, it's missing its top level domain. Or it has consecutive dots and someone hit the period twice. Or let's also test for another way that an email address is valid. Let's make sure that we're not throwing out some fairly complex emails that do have a lot of things that, like maybe a plus in the username or a long domain. So we'll test a valid yet complex email address. Now this is where you are going to have covered a lot of scenarios if you did this. I'm sure that many of you are looking at this list and thinking, oh, well, he forgot to do this or that. There's another thing that you should test. Probably from experience where you've skinned your knee in analyzing just something as simple as an email address. And so yes, 8 is not, I'm not saying that 8 is enough for this one. That's all that I could fit on the slide. There are going to be other scenarios that you need to test for. And you're going to need to think about your specific application and specific ways that yours could go wrong. All right, I'm going to give you a pro tip for modularizing your flows. We added a new feature earlier this year in 8.9, which will help significantly with doing this. You might be thinking about some flows that you've already developed and thinking, oh man, that thing is big. That's going to take a lot of copying and pasting to get all those steps into some subflows. We added something for you called the Create Subflow shortcut. All right, so when you have your big flow, what you can do is you can highlight any group of steps, click on Create Subflow, give it a name, then click on the Create Subflow button, and immediately they're collapsed into their own subflow. What's happening behind the scenes is it's creating a new flow in whatever folder you're in. It's taking those steps and it's putting it in that flow, and then it's adding a subflow step there for you. Any of the data that these steps are looking for as input data get added as input data to that subflow. 8.9. Yep, and greater.
That's a great. Yeah, that was awesome.
When the development team sends out like little announcements every once in a while, just, hey, here's a new thing that we're working on. Here's a new thing that got in. This one, when they put that in Slack, there were so many cheers and everybody was so excited. It's one of those very small quality of life improvements that is huge.
So
Yes?
when you create the subflow, is it actually creating in the folder where the existing flow is, or the folder that you were in when you took the flow? Because there's been times when I've searched to go to a flow.
Yes.
And I've gone in there and I've created something else in there, and it's actually put in a different folder.
That is a really good question, and I'm not sure. I don't know. I think it would be the flow, or the folder that the flow actually lives in. That's where I would assume that it would get created, but you just have to try it and see. Try it once and see which of the two folders it ends up in. So hopefully that will make your life easier. All right, so quick review. Do I have to test? Yes. Who cares? Everyone. How many tests are needed? More. You do need more tests. And how can I make my testing life easier? Modularize. Take your stuff and get your common pieces of functionality grouped together, and that will help you significantly. All right, we've got a few minutes left, and so I want to give you I want to quickly add a unit test to this flow. Let me change my display real quick so I can have it here as well. All right, great. So here's that simple flow that is looking at the email address and validating it. I've added those 8 unit tests. Let's run them. I ran them, and most of them passed, but I found a few problems. First of all, valid email, but from a banned domain. All right, well, let's see what's going into here. This is the email address coming in, example@gmail.com. And it says that whoever wrote this test, that they're testing for the banned domain of Gmail. So it looks like it's a test that should actually pass. So what we can do is on any unit test, you can click the little arrow next to it and it'll run that one individually in the debugger so that you can step through the steps and look at what's happening. So I click that arrow and it's run with that. So I can see that Gmail is getting evaluated as not being banned. But the test said that it was testing to see if it was banned. So now I need to figure out, is there something wrong with the test or is there something wrong with my flow? So let's go look at the flow. So in the flow, I look and I say, okay, this is the is domain in the list of banned emails. Oh, somebody typoed. Someone has checked for gmails.com when obviously it was trying to check for gmail.com. So we fixed that. Now we run it again, click run all, and now our unit test passed. So we found an actual issue in our flow. Now we've got another problem here. Invalid email address, we're testing to see if it behaves correctly for invalid email addresses where somebody has consecutive dots in the domain. Well, I can see that we are handing in consecutive dots in the domain, but it's not running correctly. I'm going to click this button here to show you the evaluation rule. I meant to do that earlier with this. So you can see that I'm checking for the outcome path that is named invalid. So you remember I had 2 outcome paths in this flow. One is named valid, one is named invalid. So I'm telling this evaluation rule to expect that I hit the invalid path because this email address is indeed invalid. It should be hitting the invalid path. So I'm going to run it individually and look at it and see that this regex step that I have here is evaluating ... with this pattern, and it's saying that that's valid. So there's something wrong with my regex. Now, thankfully for me, I happen to have 2 bits of regex here. Somebody annotated for me. This is wonderful. How did that happen? One of them even labeled disallow consecutive dots perfectly. Perfect. Now, I don't know regex. I'm not a regex expert. I can't look at that and see if that is correct, but I'm going to try it because that looks like a likely solution to my problem. So let's try this regex instead. So I go in my regex step and I can see that it is configured with this shorter regex. I'm going to paste in the longer one. Now, I have a moment of uncertainty right now. I just said, I don't understand regex very well. I'm certainly not able to look at this and know exactly what this is doing. I just found this, let's say, on Stack Overflow, and I think that I found a better bit of regex. I pasted in there. Now, I could test for the double dots and see if it correctly blocks that, but now I'm so thankful that I have the safety net of the other 7 tests, because now that I've added this new regex, I can go debug it, and I don't know all these other invalid things that it was checking for. I don't know if this new regex broke any of those, but I click run all, and I have the piece of 8 green check marks, and now I know, okay, great, I didn't break anything else by modifying that regex. I can have confidence that all these other things are still working, and I also now have handled for the double dots. So this is where having a good suite of unit tests on your flow really helps, because it aids in the confidence of making changes like that, where you may be uncertain if making that change is something that's going to break another bit of functionality. All right, and with that, go forth and add unit tests to all of your flows. Thank you.